Hi, welcome to Cherie's Weight Loss Journey. We finally got some sunshine. It's been overcast, muggy as F, and but since we got some sunshine and it got hot, we're in the mid 80s right now. Me and Snoopy Baby, we decided we were gonna get out here and walk. Maybe we might get out here and walk. Who knows? Who knows? But we're gonna get out here and at least go for a ride, because why not? Right? We figured we want to get the pulse of our community after the Independence Day celebration. Okay, today is Sunday the 6th. The day before the 7-7 portal opens, right? So that is just hours away. Hours. Okay? Let's see, here we have a New World Church, United Methodist Church. You know, one of the things that I couldn't help but think about, right? Because last month, you know, it had became very clear to me that, you know, we weaponize our sons, right? We weaponize our sons in the family. You know, there was a time immediately, you know, before they even get out into the world, you know, they got drafted into, you know, becoming a protector of their country. Okay. So, yeah, they've been weaponized, and that's understandable. But what we see is they don't give an exit plan for these warriors. Okay? When they went through basic training, I guess, you know, it was what, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, who knows? But they weren't given an exit plan. They wasn't. They pretty much was given a good old pat on the back. If they were worthy, maybe a couple of medals, you know, and told, you know, now go have a good life. You've served your country well, right? But the lack of closure has also caused these guys to inappropriately bring their survival soldier training into the house. Okay? Into the house. And, you know, he sees his son as either part of the policing or either part of the military or maybe even a part of the political force that leads the whole country. And then we have the other ones, you know, who decide to take a more subtle approach through religion. Right? And today is Sunday. You know, they don't stay in church all day on Sunday. They try to get in and get out. Get in and get out. Right? Give the people their instructions. Get out. Go watch, games of competition. You might go back to evening service. You might. If, you wasn't drinking too much and eating too much. Right? Okay. So, at least you showed up long enough to get the people to give their tithes. Their tithes of 10%. And you teach them this from the time they walk in the door. We're not going to consider you a member unless you give 10% on a regular basis. And only then will we give you your receipt of declaration of providing a donation that you could write off on your taxes. All right? So, mind you, like I said, the church is not going to be open all day. Right? They're not going to have their doors open. Not here in America. No. Right? Now, if you go to some foreign lands, they'll blast, gospel songs throughout the day. They'll have reminders of when you're supposed to pray. Drop what you're doing, and pray to Allah. Okay. So, of course, the men will say, well, it just depends on, how often you need to be reminded of your God. Okay. If you say so. So, now we're going through a whole recession, right? And we have, we've seen what happened during Hurricane Helena, right? Where in times of, crises and flooding, they didn't want to open up their churches nor their facilities, to house the people and to keep them safe. It was appalling. It really was. It had really diminished, our conception of how we see, our infrastructure. And it was like, what happened? Where did it break down at? Where did it break down at? Right? So, the institutions, such as the churches, which were supposed to be charitable organizations, they only gave food when they received, federal aid to give food. Otherwise, they basically kept the food for their members and for their local community. Now, they have licensed themselves, enough to where, they could provide education. They could provide group insurances, both health and life. They could provide shelter. They could do all of these things. But I live in the area that's called the Bible Belt, right? And there's a church, at least one church every quarter of a mile. There's a church. Okay? These churches are living tax-free. Right? They live in tax-free. usually ran by a man. Oh my God. I'm looking down the street and I'm seeing this restaurant waving the Mexican flag by itself, not accompanied with the American flag, but just the Mexican flag by itself, right? The green, the white, and the red, with some type of sigil in the middle. Okay. Because I'm sure Mexico, they have their own issues. I can't really speak on it, because the little bit of, traveling to Mexico that I did had been just to step foot across the border and then, jump right back over into America, right? Just long enough to see, oh my gosh, you mean to tell me I can't drink the water? You mean to tell me y'all don't have, enforcement of your own laws, and if you do, they're corrupt, okay, so I jump back over here to America. So, yeah, I got off topic because, like I said, I'm riding down the street and then there's this restaurant. Now, this is not an ordinary restaurant. This is a restaurant, bar, bordello kind of, situation, okay? So, it's no wonder that they would, not completely feel it appropriate to show a union of flags, but just their only loyalty to a country that they don't live in. Confused. These men are confused, right? That's why I call them the rebels without causes, right? They really are. So, now, getting back to anecdotal alert. When I was younger and I was living in Washington State, somehow or another, as a young girl with a child, I was approached by men who said I made the perfect cover. I was like, perfect cover? What do you mean? And this is what I'm talking about when they scapegoat women. It was a casual conversation. There was no true intimidation involved. And as a matter of fact, I said, no, I don't want to be a front. My home is to protect me and my daughter. What do you mean a front for you? Of course, they told me that, there would be enough money to where I could live the lifestyle that I wanted to provide for my child. Right? And I still said no. And I ended up thrown in a room by myself with a big rock. And they said, if you could smoke that rock, we'll let you out. Well, I smoked the rock. They swore up and down that I would be loving the rock. No, I didn't love the rock because I love having a sound and sober mind. I didn't like the sensations of sweating and heart palpitating for no reason at all. of something I ingested, you know. And so even though, you know, they came back, they thought for sure I'd be laid out, you know, succumb to this rock. I'm telling you, the rock was the size of a baseball. And I had smoked it down to almost the size of a jawbreaker. Okay? And they had a conversation with me, and they seen that, you know, I was still of sound mind. I still refused their offer, and pretty much they left me alone, right? But I knew that even though they had left me alone, I still had to get out of Dodge. I still had to leave. You can't tell me, oh, well, you could just go to one side of the county to the other side of the county. And I'm like, nah, I already traveled like that, you know. Once I go from one side of a county to another side of a county to and breach onto another county, you know, I already know that this place is pretty damn small. So I felt like it was safer for me to move to California, and at least I would have, you know, the protection of my father, which I did. But, you know, there was problems, you know. My husband at the time, who was very abusive, who was very egotistical, who I don't even know how at his young age, you know, thought that, you know, he could lead a family when, you know, this dude, you know, he was not viable. Let's just put it like that. He was not viable. He was happy enough to be able to play in bars, have enough food to eat, and hopefully find, you know, some woman that he could, you know, spend the night with for a day or even several days. And I was like, that's a king? So, yeah. Now, back in the day, you know, a lot of the guys, you know, they were mesmerized by Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali, you know, and that's understandable. But, you know, they missed a key part of these men who were channeling their energy. They were channeling their energy while being celibate. Right? These younger people, they're trying to channel their energy while still being sexual, not realizing that they've just amplified their sexual addictions. Okay? So, yeah. See, that's where they get it wrong. They don't know that that's where they get it wrong. They keep thinking that, you know, they're doing the right thing, and that the wrong things that they're doing, they keep saying it's natural. They keep saying it's human nature. They keep saying it's, you know, it's something that everybody does. Look at this big, beautiful church. Yeah. Totally empty. So then when it gets into the home, these guys are tyrants. They're tyrants, you know, to the women in the household, right? getting back to what I had said in my previous videos. They're telling the guys, no, men don't wash dishes. No, men don't dry dishes. No, men don't go cooking. No, men doesn't do the shopping. No, men don't clean the house. And hell no, men aren't going to watch the babies. Okay, so now they're in the house, and even when they ask, well, why aren't men supposed to do that? They get a quick answer. That's women's work. Right? And and if there's no woman in the house, then it's going to be the sister's job to do it. I can't even tell you how many times I've heard the eldest female talk about how, she felt as if, she was more of a mother than the actual mother. But of course she was, because the mother was also out there working. Right? The mother was out there working, helping to provide an income. If the mother wasn't out there providing an income, it was usually because the mother probably had about 5 to 8 kids in the house. And so, yeah, she needed help. The help that she was not going to get from any male in the house. You couldn't even depend on the males in the house to watch over their siblings when they would go outside and play. Because let the males say it, that they can't protect themselves when they're out playing, much less their younger siblings. They definitely can't protect their younger siblings and themselves at the same time. This is such a beautiful place to drive. It's full of foliage, and then there's the lake on the other side. It's so peaceful, it's so quiet, it's so calm. You can only go, you're only supposed to go 20 miles an hour. Not everybody obeys the law, of course. On the right side, we have Dallas Arboretum. I was watching a video earlier today about the various plant life that you can learn about going to the Arboretum. They'll talk about how, various plant lives in different regions, because they will set up different parts of the Arboretum to mimic the similar ecology of that area, so that that same plant could grow in a different region. I hope that makes sense to you. If it doesn't, it's not my fault. Okay, so so this is one of the reasons why, when we speak about the family, and the family is so jacked up, so problematic, and what's worse is, the men, are refusing to be deprogrammed and reprogrammed to live a life of a civilian. That's that, okay? That's what it comes down to, is that these men are refusing to learn a life of a civilian. They're not warriors. They're not survivalists. They're not even a family man because they don't know how to be one. Okay? So, if you were to impartially look at that situation, it appears as if we have people in these leadership positions, in derelict of duty because they really don't know how. And if you even try to assist them, right? Because there's a lot of women out here who would try their best. They would try their best to plant ideas, to plant seeds, to allow these men to think that this was their idea, because otherwise they won't do it, right? A lot of them, they know, okay, if they wait 6 months, a year later, they can they can go back to that idea and then, commence that idea and say that it was originally their idea. To me, it's a simple, solvable problem. If they get reprogrammed in jail, or if they get reprogrammed in a government program, things can have the ability to become more normalized. And this weird violence that we have towards women, is a result that the sons have been weaponized. And, because the sons have been weaponized, they're living their whole life integrated with, dominance and conquering. And sometimes to the point of, it's a do or die situation in their heads. And this is not something that, we can just sweep under the rug, because everybody is getting a message. There was this weird, homeless, 60-plus-year-old, crazy-ass man that came on my feed, where he decided that he was going to attack an assistant manager at a racetrack gasoline stop, and he was kind of going out of his mind, talking about he has to kill Eve, right? And even worse than that, these people are too afraid to go up against other men. They are extremely afraid to go against other men. Okay? Because that would be too much like, right? The fairness of the battle would, be leveled out, right? Even in love, they'll say, it's not about love, it's about leverage. Like, what? I don't know who would want to be with someone that's all they're going to do is hold leverage over your head. Even if you were the last resort, chances are they'll probably take enough to eat off of for a little while and get away from your ass. which is pretty much what we're seeing going on in our society today, where the women are, figuring out some type of exit plan. Now granted, the hard part about it is that there's no land upon the earth that's a safe haven for women at all. It would be nice if there was one country dedicated into protecting women that don't want nothing to do with men. And then men can then battle each other to keep the wolves out while being shepherds of the lambs. But the problem with that is, if the women are thriving, their jealousy would become so overwhelming that they would try to figure out every reason as to why they should have that land, and then give the woman, the land of desolate, because that's what their land is going to turn into. Because men, they're not going to do anything if they don't have a woman. They're not. They're not going to do nothing. They will lay around in a loincloth. All day, all night, as long as they can eat, they'll be happy. So, if a woman has her own land, he will say, no, we should relocate them. We should put them in the desert. Now, say women, go to the desert. They take the desert, and all of a sudden, the desert is now a beautiful place to be, right? They'll be like, no. We need the minerals and we need the oil underneath that desert land. We can't let them stay there either. It's like that. That's just an example. You can't let women go and stay in the mountains because no, these women, they'll be chopping down trees and, deforesting and, they'll be the only ones having the oxygen. It don't matter. These men, they have all of the diabolical genius of thinking of ways to strategize, against women. And women keep saying, well, if you could, strategize against women, why can't you do the same thing with women? Right? Kind of goes back to that meme, where the man is saying, I'll die for you. Right? And then the woman says, no, I don't want you to die for me. I want you to live. To really live for me. And he was like, what are you talking about? I am living. And it's like they don't get it. They don't want to get it. And to them, if it means change, no. Right? You can't tell them that, look, you as a grown-ass man, once you get past, 36 years old. Once a man gets past 36 years old, he might as well get reprogrammed into becoming a functional, decent human being. This is not somebody that you're really going to be able to utilize as a soldier. This is not somebody that hasn't, reached their peak. Right? So yeah, we decided to stop here and take this beautiful panoramic situation